you bring up a lot of information with DARPA, with the CIA that most people don't have access to, and it makes a lot of people wonder, what extensive background do you have that more so than we don't even know about?
Right, and that's a variation on a question that was put to me by Stu Peterson a few months ago that he's kind of weaponized because of the answer that I gave him. And he said essentially in a more direct way this question, well, what haven't you told us? How much do you really know? How much more do you know than what you've told us? And so please understand that I've been running a consulting company, a small consulting shop to make my daily bread, pay for horses, pay for hay, for better part of 30 years now. And I've worked with some of the largest companies in the world, large European chemical companies. I worked for Solvay in their biologics group out of Waste, but I was based in Georgia. I've worked for many, many different companies at small startups all the way up. And as a consultant, the rules are always that you sign a non-disclosure agreement. So when you ask, well, why haven't you told us everything you know?
Yeah.
If I was to tell you everything that I knew and that I've experienced, number one, it would take hours, if not days. And number two, it would breach my responsibilities to my old clients. And that's just as much a failure of integrity as anything else. Yeah. So I talk about the things that seem relevant at the time and which I am at liberty to discuss. So for instance, I've been granted secret clearance. Now, secret clearance is kind of the entry-level clearance level in Department of Defense. Okay, it's not top secret. It's not top secret compartmentalized. So the really juicy stuff I don't know about. But there are things that I have been given, I've been privy to, that once again, it would be a breach of my oath and my agreements to disclose those things publicly. So I talk about the things that I can to try to help illuminate whatever the topic is. And I ask for respect. I've been running a company for a long time. It's a question, of respecting me and respecting my customers. And it does seem to me a little pretentious. What do I owe, just to take a name, Stu Peters? What contractual relationship? Some people get confused. They think that I'm getting paid for these various broadcasts and hits. And I recently did this fun video where I do a cameo for a rapper for High Res for his 2+2+5 video.
Class, please welcome the new student, Robert.
Welcome, Robert.
Wow.
Go and put your hands up, everybody stand up. The whole world going mad, bruh. 2 + 2 = 5. You a homophobe if you don't think that adds up.
And people were posting that, you must have paid Dr. Malone a lot of money for this. No, actually, we probably spent more money going down there to help him because he asked for help, and we consider him and Rachel a friend. So there are those in this space that are seeking to monetize. Many people are. We all have to make a living somehow. And many people are trying to monetize in various ways, selling vitamins or whatever the thing is, right. Or clicks on their podcast. Yeah. And that can be translated into money. I mean, that's the ecosystem we're in. I'm fortunate, Jill and I are fortunate, not that we're wealthy. We have been very frugal. We've had to for our whole lives. We're not silver spoons. And we have managed to pay off all of our property. The tractor's paid off. The cars are all paid off. I drive a 2006 dually diesel flatbed and a 2006 Audi A4. We don't live fancy. But the Substack has become our primary source of revenue. And the lovely thing about Substack, and we don't charge anybody. Anybody can sign up for it and they get it for free because the goal is to get the information out. And fortunately, enough people wish to just support us that a small fraction, less than 10% of the people that subscribe, pay a monthly subscription fee. And that's enough that it sustains us and allows us to travel. And like coming here, this is at our own nickel, and we're going to be going to the conference in Stockholm, and we're paying for that. So with the Substack, what that does is it creates a situation where we have a very diverse donor base. We're not dependent on any one person. We don't have big donors that have written us a big check that therefore we have to listen to whatever they want to say. Because it's this kind of decentralized funding source, we're at liberty to follow our own conscience. So in terms of why haven't I shared everything that I know, it's for these reasons that much of what I know comes in the context of me having been a consultant for decades. There's also that I know from being in this space for years. And the truth is that the CIA and the intelligence community, because the CIA is just one branch in the United States, it's the external branch. So Europe and Canada and other places are very aware of the CIA, not so aware of Department of Homeland Security, for instance, or the National Security Agency that does a lot of the data processing and stuff. For historic reasons, having to do with the politics of what happened when I made these discoveries, my mentor told me that if I left the Salk Institute and left his lab at the time that I did, when I had my nervous breakdown, I would never get an NIH grant. And there are people in the company that I went to that have built their careers largely for taking credit for what I did, with them being my supervisor, and they really haven't wanted me to have a strong presence in the academic community. I'm choosing my words. And it's been necessary for me to just make my living and do my work to find other ways to get funding and other ways to make my way. So hence the consulting. And also when I finally finished medical school, because I did 2 years of medical school and the graduate work and the startup work at Vical, and then finished my medical school. And when I got out of that, I went back to UC Davis, which was really a safe place for me. And I wrote a series of grants and contracts, and in my internship year, I had captured well over $1 million. And one of the big ones for that was for developing a DNA vaccine for AIDS. And that came from the U.S. Navy. And so at the very start of my career, at a time when I really I was blocked from any NIH funding, I received this large award from the Navy. And so I became familiar with that system, comfortable in that system. I knew it was kind of a safe space. And one of the things about the Department of Defense, for all its flaws, which are many, is that it's more focused on product development and less focused on publishing papers and gaining academic awards and status, unlike NIH, where it's all kind of about where you publish and how important was that and your relative academic status. So I've always felt more comfortable working with the Department of Defense. And when there was in the late 90s through early 2000s, there was a crash in funding for research, which made it very hard to continue as an academic because I was on soft money, which that means is you're basically a small businessman, only you have to pay 40% of whatever you get to your dean. That's how that little game works. And so it was hard times, and we had done a startup with a Norwegian company called Inovio, and we were just getting that going. Jill actually incorporated Inovio USA, and then the planes hit the towers and the Pentagon, and the Norwegian investors pulled back. The company still exists, Inovio, in San Diego, with the technology that we put into it, but we were left high and dry. How are you going to pay your bills? And a colleague at the state of Maryland in the Department of Business Development, Dan Healy, I called him up and I said, Dan, this is tough. There's no work and we're high and dry. And he said, well, there's this new startup company up in Frederick, Maryland, and I'll make a call and see about getting a job there. Well, this was Dyneport Vaccine Company, and it's right after the anthrax attacks, and it's really the birth of the whole biodefense military-industrial complex. And Dyneport, unbeknownst to me, was a partnership between a company called Porton International in the United Kingdom, which had roots with DSTL, which is the kind of UK version of USAMRIID, the former biowarfare center of the United States. So Porton International and this company called DynCorp. And I had no idea, I had no experience in this space. DynCorp is one of the two large mercenary armies in the United States. And so I'm busy getting inducted to my new job, and I'm surrounded by these great big bulky warriors that just come out of Iraq, and I had no idea what I was getting into. But it was a crash course in really the very beginning. We had as our portfolio, I had as my portfolio in clinical development, virtually all of the drugs, antibodies, and vaccines being developed for any of the biodefense applications for the Department of Defense. So I became familiar with everything, really. Did a big project on the smallpox vaccine and the toxicity with that. So, for instance, when monkeypox came around, I knew all about that stuff. I'd worked with influenza for years. And it just, that world is full of CIA people. And so if you're going to do business in that area, you encounter these people all the time. And at one point, after I left Dyneport, a guy who was formerly head of the government agency within DOD, so Chem Biodefense for Defense Threat Reduction Agency, which is not DARPA, it's a DOD agency that was formed to mitigate the risk largely of loose nukes after the Soviet Union collapsed, but then took on this biodefense thing. So the guy that had been running one of the big branches of that I had been contracting to, retired. And I met him at a conference and said, hey, you're retired now, you don't know anything about working in the private sector. And I'd like to work with you, and let's form a partnership and set up a company. So we set up Galloway and Associates. And then in that, he disclosed that he was a trained CIA officer. I hadn't known. And he talked to me about how the training goes and how they have, what they have in this space. And then he introduced me to other ones, including Michael Callahan. As has kind of been the core of my consulting business, I've worked now for decades at kind of the interface between industry and all of these small startup, tech companies that I'm really facile with, because I understand their world. I understand discovery research and what happens with a small business and filing patents and all that. I've started small businesses. I totally get that world all the way through up big pharma, and I've worked for a Gates Foundation company. So I understand all that space. Plus I understand the government. So I basically just found where the market, where people want me, where my customers are, is helping them to work at the interface between the government and these innovative startups. And I did it intentionally because what I saw again and again at Dyneport was these very large established federal contractors, Battelle is an example, and there are many others, were offering the government kind of B-grade solutions, stuff that wasn't at the front edge, the latest tech, but they knew how to work all the levers and arms to get the money, right? And the companies that had the new emerging ideas and technology, they didn't have time to learn how to work the levers of government. And so that kind of became a core to my consulting business, was working at the interface of these, so that I could help the companies that had the better tech respond to the opportunities that the federal government was seeking. And then over time, what developed was people in the government, knowing that I could do this, started coming to me and saying, hey, Robert, we've got this problem. It looks like this. This is the kind of solution we need. Can you pull together a team to do that? And that kind of became a core. And a great example of that was when we had this West African Ebola outbreak. And everybody, I mean, I remember at one point driving along the freeway at Ames, Iowa, going to my client at the time, that the government had actively encouraged should hire me. And I get a phone call from a colonel who's just come out of a Pentagon briefing, says, Robert, you've got to accelerate this program because we just had a briefing suggesting that Ebola may be going aerosol and we could have 1 billion people dead over the next year. How'd you like to get that phone call, Robert? Yeah. Get going, because we could have 1 billion people dead next year if you don't accelerate the program.
No pressure.
No pressure there. So that's kind of been my world. I hope that helps.